you smell it? That smell. The kind of smelly smell. The smelly smell that smells smelly.
Hey, so I thought I would go over a little bit of what makes AQUA-MARINE different from a fish hydrolysate. I get asked that quite a lot with it. Is it just a dry powder version of a fish hydrolysate? So yeah, I thought I would go over some of the things that make it different and how it's beneficial for your growth. Number one would be amino acid quality. When you look at a fish hydrolysate, you'll often see enzymatically digested fish, contains amino acids, and yeah, that's true, but the form that they're in matters. What they're typically doing with a fish hydrolysate is they're using pepsin, which is an enzyme present in the fish flesh itself, to hydrolyze that fish down and sort of, get it into a liquid form that's kind of, broken down. But that isn't a process that's sufficient to take those intact protein sources and completely render them into free-form amino acids. What you typically have left is intact proteins. And so proteins are made up of amino acids, but because they're not in their free form, they don't provide the same sort of biostimulant effect that free-form amino acids do. The ones that are in AQUA-MARINE have gone a step further. They've had a protease enzyme applied to them, which takes them from an intact protein and chops those up and effectively turns them into free-form aminos. In terms of a biostimulant effects, immediate uptake by the plant through the roots, more able to be uptaken by the leaves if they're applied by foliar. Microbes can actually use them a lot more effectively than what they can just an intact protein source, which to the soil, yes, that'll just function like a nitrogen source and that'll feed things, but it's not the same thing. The other thing that makes AQUA-MARINE pretty cool is that for the most part with your fish hydrolysates, you're just dealing with a general NPK. The places that make it, they're typically processing a wide variety of fish, and the NPK ratio is whatever the fish is that they're processing. They don't have a lot of control over that. Whereas with AQUA-MARINE, because we're formulating it from scratch, we can vary the ingredients for different phases. We've been able to make a grow formula and a bloom formula. The grow formula has a bit more nitrogen and potassium, and the bloom formula focuses more on phosphorus and potassium, so you can sort of better cater to those different phases rather than just having the one NPK ratio the whole way through. When you're talking NPK with fish hydrolysate, what you'll typically find is that the phosphorus in them is really quite low. The overall NPK with them is normally really low too, so sometimes you might be less than 1% of the whole thing is NPK, and that's kind of fine because it's more of a soil food, so it's not really meant to be like an NPK fertilizer. What you'll typically find is that the phosphorus is normally quite low, and the reason for that is pretty simple. To make fish hydrolysate and make it store correctly, you've got to filter out most, if not all, of the bone portion of it to actually get it to store correctly. Most of your phosphorus is in the bone portion, so the calcium phosphate part. Now the trouble with having that in the hydrolysate is that, number one, they would have to micronize it down, takes specialized equipment, and number two, that calcium phosphate is then going to push the pH of the fish hydrolysate up in storage. Really isn't something that you can have happen with that stuff. It has to be kept really acidic or it will spoil and go really putrid. So they filter out the bone portion. Some of them you'll see have, a reasonable amount of phosphorus in them, but what they're not telling you, coming from phosphoric acid usually, to get a liquid fish hydrolysate to store for a longer period of time, usually either sulfuric or phosphoric acid is added to that, and it's not a small amount either. 2 to 5% of the whole product might be made up of that acid. On one hand, you're trying to avoid adding sulfuric acid and phosphoric acid and things like that to your garden when you're doing pH adjustment. But on the other hand, if you're using a fish hydrolysate and it contains up to 5% phosphoric acid, and say you're using 100 mils of that in a 10 litre watering can, less than ideal in terms of soil chemistry. It'll eat through your pH buffering pretty quickly. From a chemistry perspective, it's really not ideal. It's something that really being used as a preservative. It's not something present in the actual fish itself. What we did with AQUA-MARINE was we managed to work out a way to take fish bone, hydrolyze it, and then actually micronize the bone portion of it right down so it flows very easily through a watering can. What makes that so different is, say you're applying it every week. So every week, instead of getting pH down applied to your soil, you're getting calcium phosphate in a micronized form. Calcium phosphate provides a mild buffering while you're using it. The phosphorus portion in AQUA-MARINE is actually a lot more beneficial to your soil than what most hydrolysates would be, and the actual NPK ratio of them is also a lot richer than what you would find in a hydrolysate, where you might be applying 5 to 10 mils per litre of a fish hydrolysate, you might be applying 0.1 grams of AQUA-MARINE. The big difference, but what makes more of a difference is over the longer term. So say over a 12-week crop cycle where you're applying this once or twice a week, sometimes more, that down pressure effect that the acids that are in a fish hydrolysate have on your soil is going to amount up to quite a lot of chemistry difference compared to applying something like micronized fish bone. So that's a pretty huge and crucial difference, and it's one of the reasons why you can apply AQUA-MARINE much more often than what you could a fish hydrolysate without eating through all your soil buffering, creating pH issues. One of the other things that makes it really cool, there's a really high quality potassium source in it as well. Micronized langbonite is what we're using for it. Langbonite provides potassium and magnesium in complementary ratios to each other. In terms of other biostimulants, most of what you'll find with your fish hydrolysate is a lot of it's really just water. Most of what makes up most of it is, yes, there's a fish portion to it. There's also gelling agents that sort of stop the fish from settling out of the liquid. There's the aforementioned acids for preservatives, but most of it is really just water. When we looked at designing AQUA-MARINE, we looked at, okay, so we want to provide NPK and all that sort of stuff, but what's the rest of the material going to be made up of? That gave us an opportunity to put a whole bunch of different biostimulants in there. There's a high quality form of fulvic acid. There's a really good dose of a bunch of different polysaccharides. Both of those together really do provide a pretty potent stimulatory response even by themselves. And you add those to the other ingredients that are in the formula, the effect seems to be pretty synergistic between all of them. The plant's not only getting peptides, free-form aminos, high-quality potassium, and micronized fish bone, it's also getting carbohydrates and fulvic acid just coming along for the ride with that. Really, it's a product that can replace several bottled supplements that you might be using. You might be running a cocoa range and running a fulvic supplement, a fish hydrolysate, potassium booster, magnesium booster, a phosphorus booster, a carb booster. You could ditch kind of all of those things and just run a scoop or two of AQUA-MARINE and still be coming out miles ahead. Again, most of the supplement bottles that you'll be buying will be upwards of 90% or more water. For every 1 to 10 mils of that you're applying, really only sort of a few percent of that is actually active ingredient. Whereas all of that, 100% of it, is doing something for your soil. So it's all actives, it's all stuff that can be eaten by the soil and is in quality form. Really, one of the main differences, if you boil it all down to it, is fish hydrolysates are nothing more than just a way to deal with excess fish waste. If you're talking about frequent application in pots, especially inside, it can have some utility, but at the same time, there's a whole bunch of things that sort of get in the way of using it regularly. Because the more of it you use, the more you're exposing the soil to those acids. Then when you actually look at the dosage of it, so if you're using, say, anywhere between 5 to 10 mils, that's 100 mils per 10 litres. If you buy a 1 litre bottle, you're really only going to get 100 litres out of your 1 litre bottle. Versus with AQUA-MARINE, you can dose it down to 0.1 grams per litre. So then 1 gram per watering can is, enough for a lot of plants to get a sufficient dose. So then a 60 gram tin, so you get 600 litres of feeding out of one 60 gram tin, and the new 420 gram tins, 4,200 litres out of there. Quite a bit of a difference in terms of price once you add it up that way. If you think of kind of taking an enormous amount of fish and concentrating them down to their most potent form and then like jamming them in a tin, it's kind of what we've done with AQUA-MARINE. Fairly different from a liquid fish hydrolysis. So yeah, that's a bit about it. It's pretty cool stuff. It might not smell the best, but at the same time, your plants will absolutely love it. Check it out.